For those who may not recognize me either because of the pink or because I've been out of Mercer County for a while, my name is James Smith. I'm a missionary of the Precious Blood, and despite what one of my professors asked me or assured me of a few years ago, no, I'm not in the Witness Protection Program, although James David Smith will make a great name for them after I pass. It's a privilege to be with you this weekend and to get a chance to pray with you this morning. There is one among you whom you do not recognize, the one who is coming after me. I think it was John the Baptist in the thought bubble for the great spiritual direction joke years ago. There is good news and greater news. The good news is that there is a Savior, and the greater news is that it's not you. John is an odd choice for today. Not because it's Advent. John the Baptizer is a great choice for Advent. John is an odd choice for today, being the blob of pink on our calendar. Forgive me, rose. Gaudete Sunday, rejoice. The missal's instruction to rejoice in the midst of the season of preparation makes sense. Lent does the same thing, a small break in the middle of weeks of purple, and given the early church's practice of celebrating the sacraments of initiation at both the Easter Vigil and the Christmas Vigil, both seasons as seasons of preparation make sense. And maybe rejoicing today makes sense. This year gives us the shortest fourth week of Advent possible. For some parishes, the next week of Advent will be a matter of hours. Not even a full day from the fourth Sunday of Advent to Christmas Day this year. The church musicians and presiders and preachers are not celebrating because of that. But there are legitimate reasons to be cautious or shy to rejoice. Another week of bombardments and death in the land of Jesus' birth. More and more civilians killed in the name of rooting out those responsible for a terrorist attack. An eye for an eye has left our ears deaf in a way. For some, the season of holidays, greetings, and festivities are the first or maybe the continued reminder of the holidays without a spouse, a parent, a child, or a loved one. Rejoicing is a distant land we might want to return to in this season of spiking depression and isolation. Moving backwards on the calendar too, this is an especially unfitting time for rejoicing. 3 days ago, December 14th, was an anniversary of 11 years, not an especially monumental number for that matter, but this past Thursday was the 11th anniversary of the Sandy Hook school shooting. Charlotte, Daniel, Olivia, Josephine, Dylan, Madeline, Catherine, Chase, Jesse, Hannah, James, Grace, Emily, Jack, Noah, Carolyn, Jessica, Ariel, Benjamin, and Allison. This year would have been their senior year of high school. For a multitude of reasons, maybe more multitude than the hosts of the upcoming Christmas season, for a multitude of reasons, this year certainly doesn't feel like a year acceptable to the Lord, let alone one worth rejoicing. One of my favorite authors on vocation and spirituality, at least in relation to ministry and teaching, Parker Palmer, wrote a few years ago, "Many of us have experienced this in our personal lives, when someone dear to us dies, and we slowly awaken to the fact that this heartbreaking loss has not destroyed us, but opened us to greater compassion and a larger understanding of life. Creative tension holding is a human capacity that can be transferred from personal to public life." The tension at the banks of the Jordan between John and the one to come after is a fitting location for all of Advent. Here and not yet. Christmas decorations and parties, but not fully here yet. Christmas breaks and cookies, but not here fully yet. Incalculable loss and suffering, in the direction of compassion and a larger understanding of life, here but not fully here yet. Despite the pain and suffering, the evil and the unjust, there is a voice crying out in the desert. There is one preparing the way for the one who is to come. There is ultimately light, but before we get there, there is one testifying to the light. And so if Christmas is the season to prepare our eyes to see the light, maybe Advent is the season of cleaning out our ears to hear the voice of the one crying out in the desert. The voices testifying to the light of the nations. The voices preparing the prison bars to fall around the captives and the prisoners. The voices preparing the heartstrings of the brokenhearted to heal. The voices preparing the wealthy for the glad tidings brought to the poor. Advent as the tuning season, if you will, of our hearts and our lives. Advent as the piano tuning of ourselves before Christmas ultimately arrives. The vision from Isaiah today, the vision John the Baptist picks up on, is somewhat of an unjust one. Third, Isaiah gives us the community of faith back in Jerusalem after the exile. It's a little easier to declare yourself anointed after exile than before it or during it. It's a little easier after the chemo or the surgery, after the pain and suffering that prepares the way of the Lord into something of greater compassion and larger understanding of life. It's a little easier after seeing across the Jordan to celebrate or to prepare to celebrate. From both Isaiah and John the Baptist, the vision of a year acceptable to the Lord and the one to come after John is in a land of exile and occupation. Maybe fewer bombs and blasts then than today, but no less violent. The vision of peace and promise is one steeped in the waters removed from rejoicing and celebrating. Steeped in the waters of heartbreaking loss and devastation. Steeped in the waters of desperation and despair. And somehow and in some way, God works through the brokenness to bring forth light and life. Not a rejection of loss and brokenness, but instead an embodiment of loss and brokenness. And through that body of loss and brokenness, through that blood with the same pulse of those experiences of destruction and despair, through that pulse, a light breaks forth to remind us that we are not alone. God does not abandon God's promise. Even when we break the covenant and when we encounter our own brokenness, God remains faithful, and God holds the fragments of our hearts. Maybe the spiritual direction joke for John the Baptist needs some updating for these days. There is good news and there is greater news. The good news is that we are all broken. The greater news is that our God is broken too. Broken in the heartbreak of the world and broken in our hands in this bread. When we remember at this table, and whether we remember it or not, our God remembers us.